Hello, welcome to Today in Bad Theology. Today, we take on the Texas abortion ban. Now, I call it the Texas abortion ban because that is what it does. It bans abortions. And I know you might say, well, SB 8 didn't actually ban all abortions. Even since that law was passed, the governor of Texas has signed into law another bill that forbids bringing the necessary drugs for abortions into Texas. So it's now banned, okay? So that's what it is. And there's bad theology in this. This is always a touchy subject, dealing with abortion, but it is bad theology in this law. I want to look at this law specifically, and we could spend a great deal of time talking about other things. We do need to talk a little bit about some of the background, how we got to this place where we've decided to ban abortions in Texas. First thing I need to mention is, if you don't know, I am a pastor in the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We were evangelical before evangelicals were, and we're not changing our name, even though it's very confusing to people. And in the ELCA, you should know that our social teachings are that women should have unfettered access to abortion, and abortion should be regulated for safety, because life is a mess. And while we do not think that abortion is a good form of birth control, we do not officially favor the use of them, and have some opinions on abortion that, frankly, many of our own church members would disagree with, saying, wait a second, I think we need more rights to it. Lutherans would say, I don't know. But you still need access to it, unfettered access to it. And it needs to be regulated for safety, because life's a mess, and sometimes it's what you have to do. So that's where I'm coming from on this, so that you know before I get into this. Now, some of you may decide, well, that immediately disqualifies me from the conversation. I can't control that, but hang around for a second. We'll look at some things. Now, to get really into the history of how Christianity has tackled abortion, we have to look at the biblical foundations against abortion. Right? So let's look at the Old Testament texts that ban abortion. Okay, that's the Old Testament. Now let's look at the New Testament texts that ban abortion. Okay, so why does the church ban abortion? Well, there actually is a text that's contemporary to the New Testament, though not in the New Testament, that does explicitly ban abortion. The text is called the Didache. The Didache, we're not exactly sure who wrote it and where, though we think it was probably somewhere in Syria or Palestine. Others think Egypt. So just frankly, like the New Testament, we don't really know where it's coming from. But it's contemporary with the New Testament. The Didache is written in the New Testament era, generally years around 110 to 120 of the Common Era. So there's some New Testament stuff that is still being written at the time the Didache is written down. And the Didache does very explicitly ban abortion. In fact, it says, you shall not kill a child by procuring miscarriage. Right? That's the term they use for it. No intentional miscarrying of a child. And that is included in a section that deals with a lot of things. If you look at the whole context, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not corrupt children, you shall not fornicate, you shall not steal, you shall not practice magic, you shall not mix poison, you shall not murder a child, whether by procuring a miscarriage or killing it once it is born. You shall not covet what belongs to your neighbor. Interesting that they've slid some other commandments into the top 10 there, which it's interesting that they've done that. Clearly the author of this text is opposed to it, and there's simply no question. It is banned by the Didache. Now, I'm reading from a fairly reputable scholarly translation of the Didache, and the theologian who does this commentary on it writes that this passage, derived from the Jewish tractate, offers the oldest explicit Christian instance of the prohibition of abortion. And That is true. The Didache, the very first Christian time we have that written down. He goes on to say, but it is certain that from the beginning, Christians following the Old Testament and Jewish custom rejected abortion. That there is no specific prohibition of it in the New Testament is accidental. Apparently, it was, whoops, we forgot to mention it. Texts become New Testament texts because they're useful for the churches in proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. If the churches wanted to proclaim a ban on abortion, they would have found a way to get one into the New Testament. They didn't, right? The New Testament didn't fall from heaven completely written. I'm sorry if you believe that it did. And it certainly was not written in King James English. God actually speaks German. The New Testament is put together by people of faith, and the canon, the list of texts, is decided over decades and decades as Christians decide what's useful in preaching and teaching in our contexts. If Christians wanted to teach there is no abortion, and that was to be an article of faith, they could have put that in their New Testament. They didn't. More importantly, though, this is simply wrong, that they're following Jewish tradition. Yes, there are Jewish traditions that say you may not perform an abortion. There are other official Jewish traditions that say you may, or sometimes you should. Jewish tradition, it's not Christian, but it's the claim was we're just following what Jews did. Nah, Jewish tradition is not unified on this matter, as Christian tradition is not unified on this matter. In Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 and 23, we find, if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there's no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take a life for a life. Gives birth prematurely is sometimes interpreted as a miscarriage. The woman has miscarried because she is struck. And some Jewish scholars have said that the fact that the miscarriage is not considered a liability, that you assaulted someone and caused them to miscarry, you're not on the hook for the miscarriage unless the woman is seriously injured. Right? That is actually meant as an understanding within the Jewish tradition, within the Exodus tradition, that the fetus is not considered to be its own life. In fact, most Judaic tradition states that the fetus doesn't have a soul, right? Many Christians, well, of course, everything. Christian, absolutely, the fetus has a soul. Well, yeah. If we're following Jewish tradition, we've completely left it here. That's not a thing. But there's also tradition that's outside of the Bible. The Talmud, for example, explains that for the first 40 days of a woman's pregnancy, the fetus is considered mere fluid. All right? It's part of the mother, and in fact is part of the mother until birth. The baby's only considered a soul or a spirit once it's born in the Jewish tradition. So if Christians are following the Jewish tradition, they're not banning abortion. And if they're banning abortion, they're not following the Jewish tradition. There are times in Jewish tradition also where there's need to terminate a pregnancy. And I'm not an expert on Jewish tradition, but there is a time when a woman is permitted to undergo a therapeutic abortion. The ruling applies even if there's no direct threat to the mother, but to save her from a great pain or great need. In other words, there was an allowance in the Jewish tradition that life is complicated, and while we are to preserve life, it's not always cut and dry. Now, in the United States, the first law, or first attempt at passing a law to ban abortion came from white Protestants who wanted abortions banned for other white Protestants. The argument being that Roman Catholics were soon going to outnumber us. In other words, we're losing the reproducing game, and we're losing it to Catholics. And of course, the unspoken claim here is that Catholics somehow are subhuman. The anti-abortion debate in the United States has its roots in a sense of white Protestant superiority and a need to continue dominating the culture. It's not really a concern for the life of the unborn, so much as it's a concern that things stay the way that they are. This is in keeping with the first Roman anti-abortion law 1,800 years earlier, when the Roman emperor passed a law saying there was no abortion permitted in Rome. The reason was not that the fetus was life. The reason was that a dad might want an heir and you shouldn't take that from him. The concern for life was not historically a part of things. And abortion becomes a major issue in the United States only in the 1970s. It is only when the fomenting and burgeoning Christian nationalist movement begins gaining steam in the 1970s that abortion becomes seen as something that is a shared value among what we would today call, or could today call, should today call, Christian nationalism. And it's this idea that God has chosen the United States and laissez-faire capitalism as the way to do things. And God has chosen us, and we must have a world in which it is look out for number one, and we must teach what we consider to be Christian values, which are basically screw over everybody. Everybody else sucks. You're on your own, and you can't have an abortion. But once you're born, we don't care if you live or die, as long as you believe what we tell you to and give us your tax money. I don't have strong feelings about Christian nationalism. So that's where abortion enters our dialogue, all right? It's not a Christian thing, right? Because Christians are divided on it. And it's hardly a foundational Christian thing, because if we had wanted it to be in the canon of Scripture, we would have put it there. So it's something we don't agree on. Claiming a Christian reason for banning abortion is in itself bad theology if you say Christians believe this, or we must uphold the commandment to preserve life, because Christians throughout history have disagreed. Now, disagreeing isn't necessarily bad theology, right? Disagreeing isn't necessarily bad theology. But the moment you claim that this is an absolutely unquestioned Christian principle and has been and has clear-cut tradition backing it for 2,000 years, and it's even in the Bible, you are simply wrong. And your premises are wrong, and therefore your argument doesn't work. Right? Now, I want us to look at the law in Texas and what my chief problem with it is. Aside from its banning what my faith tradition says is something women should have access to. Right? The law in Texas has this section that is notorious for now, and I'm not the only person who's going to say this, that this section where you can get a bounty for reporting somebody who has aided or abetted in getting an abortion. You know, any person other than an officer or employee of a state or local government entity in this state. So not law enforcement. It's actually reserved just for us citizens. May bring a civil action against a person who, 1, performs or induces an abortion in violation of this subchapter, as soon as the heartbeat is detected at 6 weeks. 2, knowingly engages in conduct that aids or abets the performance or inducement of an abortion, including paying for or reimbursing the costs of an abortion through insurance. Insurance companies illegal? Or otherwise, if the abortion is performed or induced in violation of this subchapter, regardless of whether the person knew or should have known that the abortion would be performed or induced in violations. The insurance company is now breaking the law by providing health care, which is really interesting. Or 3, intends to engage in the conduct. Intends. I know that Jesus says, You've heard it say, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that if you've looked at another woman with lust in your eye, you are guilty of adultery. Nonetheless, there is a very big difference between saying, I need to have an abortion, and actually having one. Or saying to somebody, I can help you get an abortion, and actually getting one. This law eliminates that. Basically, if I can prove that you were thinking about helping somebody, I get a bounty. So then it goes on. If a claimant prevails in an action brought under this section, the court shall award injunctive relief sufficient to prevent the defendant from violating. So basically, they will do whatever they can to stop the woman from getting the abortion, or the provider from providing it, or the aider and abetter from driving her there, or praying with her, or talking with her, or holding her while she sobs. We'll go in and force you apart. Statutory damages in an amount of not less than $10,000 for each abortion. So they could always up it, right? I mean, you got to adjust for inflation, right? Inflation's out of control. Yeah, I mean, who knows? That figure could be higher by the end of the week. Or induced in violation, and for each abortion performed or induced of this subchapter that the defendant aided or abetted in, and costs or attorney's fees. So basically, if I can prove that you were thinking about getting an abortion, or that somebody was thinking about helping you get an abortion, I am entitled to at least $10,000 plus legal fees, and you will be forcibly separated from whoever was helping you. And what's my theological problem with this is the Bible that does not ban abortion, and that is non-negotiable, by the way. It simply doesn't. Okay, it simply doesn't. The Bible that does not ban abortion does say that the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And the second commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. And it is taught throughout the 2,000 years of Christian history that those two commandments go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. If you claim to love God and are not loving your neighbor, you're failing both commandments. And we would say, if you are loving your neighbors and not loving God, you are failing at the commandments. Loving your neighbor, I don't see how loving your neighbor jibes with this kind of East German police state that Texas is envisioning, wherein we can report on each other whenever we want. I think Susie Q is considering having an abortion. Right? How am I loving my neighbor? Right? How am I loving my neighbor? Or you want to get into the Ten Commandments, all right? Maybe you don't. Maybe Jesus' words aren't good enough. I mean, he is just quoting some other texts in the Old Testament. Let's look at the top 10. Christians number the top 10 differently. The same general substance is in the 10 Commandments, but no denominations can agree on what the top 10 are. However you number them is wrong according to everybody else. I'm going to use the Lutheran numbering because God speaks German. So, yeah, I could argue that abortion is murder and would say we are not to kill, which we would say that's the 5th commandment. But Lutherans are also taught from a really young age that what that means is we are to fear and love God so that we neither endanger nor harm the lives of our neighbors, but instead help and support them in all of life's needs. Well, right there you've got the complexity of the issue, because we have to help the mom too, all right? What if her life is in danger? What if the mom is in an abusive relationship and needs to get out, but if she's got a baby, it's going to be harder, right? Life's not that simple, all right? Life's complicated. We might argue, you know, you are not to commit adultery while this person should not have had the pregnancy in the first place because they're an adulterous whore or whatever. I don't know of anybody who intentionally gets pregnant so they can have an abortion. And it's just that's not a thing. Okay? But there are other places in the commandments that even are more important here. You're not to bear false witness against your neighbor, 8th commandment. We are to fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbors, betray or slander them, or destroy their reputations. We are to come to their defense. We are to speak well of them, and we are to interpret everything they do in the best possible light. The $10,000 plus bounty is an encouragement for me to ignore the 8th commandment. Instead of interpreting what's going on over at Susie's house in the best possible light, as well, I don't know what's going on over there, but, I'm going to assume it's good. It is rather that we are to assume that they're up to no good, and the incentive to assume that is financial. Right? We're paying people to rat on their neighbors and about something that is constitutionally protected. And if we do it in the name of Jesus, then now we're in bad theology territory, because we're supposed to be helping each other, not ratting each other out for cash. All right. 9th commandment, you are not to covet your neighbor's house. And I think this is the big one here. We are to fear and love God so that we do not try to trick our neighbors out of their inheritance or property, or get it for ourselves by claiming to have a legal right to it and the like, but instead be of help and service to them in keeping what is theirs. I mean, this bounty is classic. I want $10,000, and the state's going to pay it out of this. We're going to go after the assets of whoever performed this abortion or aided and abetted in performing this abortion. Basically, I want your money, and I have recourse to it. I actually have a right to it. The law in Texas claims that I have a right to the property of anyone who is thinking about helping someone have an abortion. That's a 9th commandment violation. That's top 10, all right? That's not even some weird-ass, ritual law that no one remembers that gets trotted out every now and then. No, you're supposed to memorize this stuff. It's bad theology, all right? So I know theological arguments haven't necessarily been front and center in passing the Texas abortion ban, but when they do come up, you can rest assured they are bad theology. There is not a consistent Christian opposition to abortion. And in fact, in the earliest days of the church, when the churches could have made sure that there were writings in the New Testament that banned abortion, they chose not to do it. It simply was not something foundational for us. There is not a consistent Jewish tradition, at least not opposed to abortion, but there is a fairly powerful Jewish tradition that says you have to have a right to it. Abortion enters our national dialogue as a white Protestant supremacist tool to keep us from being outnumbered by those dirty Catholics, and only rises to prominence in the last quarter of the 20th century, when Christian nationalists look for a unifying topic. It is bad theology when we claim otherwise, because the history is very clear. And theology has to at least somehow cohere with reality. I know someone may say, well, there's no God. Well, theology would differ with you on that. And I think you probably do have a God, even if you don't admit it. But that God, well, that God can be talked about with good theology. You don't have to resort to bad. The Texas abortion ban is bad theology. Thank you for joining us today. This was I know it was a hot button topic. If you like content like this, please like, subscribe. You can drop a comment in the notes below. I'll try to link to some of the things that I've talked about in this video. If there are resources that are online, you can take a look at. You check us out on Facebook, Today in Bad Theology. That is a refereed page. I do make sure there's no abusive content that makes its way in there. Thank you for being with us. I'll see you around.